All right. Today is the 30th of June, 2023. My name is Karina Pan, and I'm here with our interviewee, Dr. Jessie Chan, on behalf of the Houston Asian American Archive. All right. So, our first question is where and when were you born?
I was born September the 1st, 1985 in Netherlands, Texas. So that's a little tiny town close to Port Arthur, Texas, for anyone who knows that area.
And how would you describe the household that you grew up in?
Um, the household I grew up in was my parents are both first generation Chinese immigrants, and I think it wasn't a particular it was there was Chinese culture involved. There I don't remember it being like particularly like it seemed like a fairly balanced household in terms of integrating both American and Chinese culture growing up. Um yeah, I we moved around a fair bit, and I think every single time we moved to a different place, it the household changed just a little bit.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. Can you I know you say you moved around a little bit. Can you describe some of the neighborhoods that you grew up in?
Yeah, sure. So I think we moved away from Port Arthur, Netherlands, when I was fairly young. We arrived in Houston. My brother was born in Houston as well. And then from Houston, we actually moved to Wales in the UK. And there it was a very, very different household, lived in sort of this really old cottage for a few years, and moved to another old cottage. And then when we moved back into the Houston, and every single time the household just changed a little bit. I mean, we threw away some stuff, of course. The culture, I think, shifts a little bit from the UK and back to the US. And yeah,
Wow, that's so interesting to hear that you've moved around so much. Do you have any childhood memories, any favorite childhood memories that you'd like to share?
sure. Yeah, I really, really loved Wales. My dad got sent there for a job in a little town called Tenby, working for Texaco, and we got to live in this little small town called Saundersfoot for I think about 3 years. And I remember it was moving from, say, Houston to a little tiny town in Wales was really different, but I love the experience. There was so much nature to explore everywhere. And yeah, the UK was it was really different, and I enjoyed getting to know UK culture and visiting London. I mostly remember getting lost in the neighborhoods behind our in the little the thickets behind our house, and that was a lot of fun.
That does sound like a lot of fun. I know you mentioned like a little bit about what your dad did, but what exactly were your parents' occupations?
Yeah, so I think before I was born, my mom was a instructor in the computer science department at Lamar University, and my dad has always been a chemical engineer with different specializations. But I think he moved from he started. I think he very early on started with Texaco, and then more recently has worked at BP, GE, and I think now Air Products.
Gotcha. So, what are some of the values that your parents emphasized in your upbringing?
Yeah, hard work. Um, Flexibility, I think, is one thing. Sort of a belief that even if you aren't good at something or if you don't like something, then you can learn to like it and you can learn to excel at it. And I think that was helpful to know. I saw this very much in my mom, how she would be able to adapt to a whole host of different things that I think were new to her. She would all read along with us when we had reading assignments, and I think we would pick apart the books together. Uh, she would maybe ask some she would be learning some of the more advanced vocabulary along with us. If we didn't recognize some words, we'd find them out together. And it was, I mean, very, of course, she outpaced us very rapidly. But it was nice to kind of see that, okay, of course, you can learn, you can adapt, you can do different things. She would pick up tons of different hobbies. And I remember when she started gardening, becoming a realtor. Of course, there are different things, different household hobbies, cooking and music and sports and all of the things that she would just basically try out. She didn't really, she might not have always gotten it at first, but she soon excelled at them after a little bit of practice. And I think that has been something that stuck with me, that we can change and we can excel at what we put our minds to.
Yeah, it's great to hear. I know you mentioned that your parents were first-gen immigrants. So when did they move to the US and why?
Yeah, so I think both of them moved to the US, if I'm not mistaken, for college. My dad, I think, went to college in Wisconsin. My mom went to college at Lamar University, and I think they met in Texas after my dad had started work, and my mom had been an instructor for a little bit. But I think that both of them moved to the U.S. for a lot of the same reasons that first generation Chinese immigrants do, to have a better life, to sort of pursue a I don't know, pursue the American dream, to get a good education. Um, yeah,
So, do you think education was really emphasized as a result?
yeah, most definitely. I mean, both my parents, so I don't think that they weren't overly strict on grades, but they always wanted to make sure that we were, I guess, trying our hardest, reaching our potential. And they'd always try and talk with us about how we were doing in school and try to make sure that we were, yeah, that we weren't falling behind. Yeah, I think education has always been emphasized. My mom would, my dad, of course, my dad did a master's and has always been very sort of very invested in how we do in terms of math and science and STEM and uh, yeah, our sort of career success. My mom always liked to tell the story that apparently one of our a distant a I think great great grandfather, somewhere back in a while back, used to be a tutor to the emperor. And so I think for her, she was also really proud of, well, we come from families that really value education.
That's really cool. Yeah, I saw you earned your bachelor's in computational and applied mathematics from Rice. So how'd you decide to attend Rice for your undergrad?
I did not think that I would get into Rice, and so it was my reach school. I applied early decision, and then I got in and I quit. That was basically it. I as soon as I heard back from Rice, I thought, oh, this is great. I've peaked, and I just went with it. Uh, my parents, I think in retrospect, they said you could have probably applied to a few other schools to see if you got in elsewhere. And I was just so happy to have gotten into Rice that I unfortunately didn't heed that advice.
Okay. Can you describe your undergraduate experience at Rice or in some like defining moments that you had?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Rice was. I think I started falling in love with Rice before I even got here as an undergrad. I visited during, I think, Owl Days, and I stayed with an I think then sophomore or then freshman Dennis Ree. He showed me around Rice, and I had the best time. Got his chance to sit in on a class. He took me around to like a couple of different social events, and it was wonderful. I mean, O week when I got here was a fantastic experience. I was so exhausted, lost my voice at the end, but it felt like there was so much energy and liveliness at Rice. When I started, I actually started as an English major, and so there was a little bit of trying to figure out what I was going to study, a little bit indecision in terms of what I would like to study. Uh, and but I started with the applied math, the computational applied math major by the end of my freshman year, and after that, that became a really big part of my time at Rice as well, getting to know that community and well, struggling through the problem sets and trying to figure out how to become an applied mathematician as well.
Okay, that's so interesting. I think it's a pretty big like shift from English to like this entire world of STEM. So how did you decide to make that change? Um,
There was so I had always I had told myself that I was going to go into philosophy or English when I got to Rice.
uh-huh.
Uh, but my dad said you should I think he said you should take some STEM classes just in case. And I ended up taking this class CAM 210, Introduction to I think computational engineering or scientific compute. I forget what it used to be called. We still teach it, but it was an introduction to computational mathematics. Essentially, one of my friends, Samuel Feng, was TAing it at the time, and I loved it. I think there a lot about that class shifted the way I thought about the field of mathematics. So I loved English and I loved creative writing. There was a poetry class that was just the highlight of my freshman year that that was the most fun I've had. One of the most fun I've had in college. But it became a little more difficult, I think, to gauge how I was doing in these English classes as I kind of proceeded to more advanced classes. And I remember an American lit class where uh, I would write an essay, but I would just not really be sure if I liked what I write. I would write an essay out with one perspective, and then I'd shift that perspective. I couldn't tell which one was the right one. I couldn't tell which one would get me the better grade. I felt a little bit unanchored in those courses, and I still have a lot of respect for the humanities and for English and the skills and the thinking it teaches. But I realized that it was nice to have something to anchor myself to. Um, and with applied math, computational mathematics in particular, it well, there's the mathematics you can anchor yourself to, but it also gave me the chance to see math from a different angle. Like in high school, you're not really taught to do mathematics with you can use a calculator, but it doesn't become a core part of your learning or your mathematical process. A lot of it is based on more theory, on formulas, or on trying to prove different things. And inserting computation into it, I suddenly was like, oh, I have never felt so anchored to a mathematical concept as when I'm implementing it, because I can check literally every single step of the code, make sure that that is consistent with what I'm thinking, make sure that all of that is working right. It was concrete in a way that I hadn't experienced before. It gave me a chance to also help some other people. Uh, if I figured out something, then I really enjoyed learning how to explain it to some others. I was a student TA or labby for this class for I think the last 7 semesters of my time at Rice, and it was a very new experience for me that really catapulted me into computational mathematics.
Wow, it definitely sounds like you've got a passion for computational math. And so I see that you also earned your master's and your PhD from UT Austin's Institute for Computational Engineering and Sciences. So what led you to decide to pursue higher education there?
Um, well, I graduated during the uh, first economic downturn in 2008, or at least not the first, but I graduated during the 2008 economic downturn. And so finding a job was a little bit trickier. but even before that, I felt like I had kind of just started in applied mathematics when I interviewed at a few companies, and it seemed like we would be doing interesting technical work, but that I wasn't really going to be able to use most of the stuff that I learned and really loved in the computational and applied mathematics major here at Rice. So I thought, okay, I'll apply for some jobs, and if I don't get them, then I'll apply for grad school. And I ended up loving the grad school visits and really enjoying the culture that I saw. And I just thought this would be great to feel like I act to do a little bit more of this, because I felt like even though I was a computational applied math undergrad major, I felt like I didn't really understand it fully by the time I graduated. And then close to the end of your senior year in these majors, you often sit in on grad courses, and I think they have the effect of just kind of showing you how large the world is in computational and applied math out there. So I thought it would. I felt like I've just started, and grad school gave me another 4 years, sorry, 5 years, 5.5 to figure that out.
Okay, that's great. Sounds like you really got a chance to pursue what you loved in grad school. Can you describe your graduate experience at the Odin Institute and some defining moments that you had?
Sure. I really enjoyed the Odin Institute. It felt very familiar and yet very different at the same time. So it was a nice way to find out that how culture influences mathematics. So Rice, for example, I think was a very computationally and mathematically oriented department, whereas the Odin Institute injected a whole lot of engineering into it as well. And this was informed by, I mean, a lot of the faculty there. My own advisor, Leszek Demkovich, was from the aerospace and civil, had a background in aerospace and civil engineering, and I'd never really worked with those people or sort of those areas before. So I got to know a lot more about kind of the mathematical models that I was trying to work with. I got to know a lot more about the ways in which engineers speak of computational concepts in a different way. And it was nice to see things differently and to see how I guess different concerns for different communities between, say, a more mathematically minded community and a more engineering based community changed the way in which they approach certain topics. So it was really eye opening in terms of the field, and Austin was just Austin was amazing. Um, my parents were a huge help. They helped me find they actually helped me uh buy a place, a condo while I was there, and I think that made it a lot easier to it made it very easy to focus on graduate school at that time, and I don't think I would have succeeded in grad school quite as much without their help. But from I loved living in Austin. It felt like a small town it felt like a small town compared with Houston, but had so much vibrant culture. It was such a cool city at that time. I played, I think, in two bands while I was there, and uh, it was it was some of the most fun I have ever had in a city. It was a lot of work and a lot of play.
That's great to hear. You mentioned playing in bands. What instrument did you play and how long had you been playing them?
I think so. I played guitar and bass all through college and all through high school, or through some of high school, most of all of college. And then when I got to Austin, I started getting more interested in the folk and indie music scene. And it was there that I got involved with a couple of folks at my church, and then the church music group. And I would be playing, depending on the day, either drums, bass, banjo, or guitar. And yeah, it was a good place to learn how to play all these as well.
Wow, that is really impressive.
And
Um,
it's all fret stuff. Fret I have respect for anyone who plays violin or anything fretless because I cannot. Frets make it easy.
How did you decide to pursue a career in academia and teaching?
To be honest, I don't know if I really consciously decided it. I think it so when I was in grad school, I don't think I ever envisioned myself becoming a professor. I think I might have envisioned a career in research, but maybe at the national labs or maybe at the research arm of some company. I think after grad school, I ended up coming back to Rice for a postdoc, and that gave me a chance to teach, gave me a chance to do research. It really pushed me, I think, in a very different direction to see how much I could do independently. And I think throughout all this, I was before actually before actually applying for an assistant professor position, I just thought, well, it'd be nice to see how far I can go. Uh, I think becoming a faculty member always seemed like such a risky, far off goal that I thought, okay, well, I can apply and then I'll apply to other stuff because I probably won't get it. And so when I got the postdoc, I thought, okay, we'll see how far this goes. When I eventually finished the postdoc and actually got a few offers, I thought, wow, I guess I'll kind of end up here. So I I don't think it was as conscious a choice as I first as I am as it is for some people. Honestly, I just kind of like what I do. Um there were some research experiences for undergraduates and some internships that I did during during undergraduate and grad school where there was just a sense of discovery. Like you notice something slightly different mathematically that you can exploit to either make an algorithm faster or to make it more accurate. And it was that sense of discovery that I kept getting little like bits of throughout grad school and throughout my postdoc. And I loved that so much that I felt like I kind of want to try and uh, see if I can get more of those. And those have really been the moments that have sustained me as a faculty member as well. Just discovering these things and discovering them with my students. It is still the most fun part of the job.
Wow, that's great. Do you ever think you had like a calling to teach, or like did you ever first like discover your passion and talent for teaching?
I'm not so sure I'm a talented teacher, to be honest. I I am admittedly not the best lecturer. I think I have to make a lot of mistakes before I get comfortable enough with the material to really teach it, to lecture on it smoothly. But I don't think I ever felt called to be a lecturer or teacher, but I do think um I really enjoyed being able to meet other people where they were at in terms of their experience. I feel like I never did math competitions or UIL or anything really mathematically related in high school, and so I always felt um, like not that good at mathematics. And uh, I think if you come from that perspective, I think you often appreciate that there are simpler ways to look at certain things. And if I can bring those simpler ways to someone else, then that is really satisfying to me. So a lot of what my postdoc advisor really drove this home, that a lot of complex mathematics is really hidden behind this veil of like notation and and terminology. And when you strip it down, it's really a lot of very concrete mathematical ideas. You can view them much more simply, much more intuitively. I think it's very similar to what some YouTube mathematician or mathematicians on YouTube will do nowadays, where they like Three Blue, One Brown, for example, makes these great videos where they break down very complex ideas and just show you the basic intuition and try to convince you that this is easy if you look at it the right way. So I think if I if I any part of a calling to teach is, I think, rooted in that I'd like people to see that, I'd like to convince myself, first of all, that most of the times this is easy if you look at it the right way, or if you find the right way for yourself to look at it. Um, Beyond that, I've learned to love it, but I don't think I ever expected to be doing it for a living.
Wow, that's great. Moving back a little bit, what were your first jobs like? Especially, I know you mentioned working as a waiter at Dumpling King. It doesn't sound easy working for $1 and tips.
That was honestly a fantastic experience. I still go there actually. We really, they, in my opinion, they still have some of the best steamed dumplings in Houston, and yeah, I will always get their green onion pancakes. Um, it was good. It was I like being front of house wait staff. I really enjoyed interacting with the customers. Uh, it I don't know. I think there's at least working in a restaurant, always feels like there's something to do. So when you're not bringing stuff, there are some dead times, of course, but it was fun to try and keep up with the dinner rush or the lunch rush whenever I was there. It was nice to feel like, okay, I have some responsibility. This is kind of new as a high school student. And it was it was somewhat it was nice to feel useful. When I was working there, there weren't the other servers often were first generation immigrants, and so many didn't speak English quite as fluently. And so it was nice to be able to, if we got a letter or if we got a phone call, then I could answer it and kind of badly translate things into Chinese for the owners and the other wait staff. And yeah, I I really enjoyed it.
That's great. Can you describe like how the roles that you've assumed have kind of evolved with your career and like teaching and doing research, and as well as like the challenges and rewards that came along with that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think so. I think this is probably true for a lot of faculty members that uh, they their connection to their research shifts and becomes maybe a little it becomes a little more distant as they proceed onward in their career. I think as a grad student, I think you just are trying to figure out, just trying to get to know your field, get to know yourself as a researcher, kind of what ways work best for you. Um, and you're of course trying to build your skill base as well. Uh, don't think I think during that time I really don't think I understood things very well. I didn't really see the world for how large it was either. As a postdoc, I think uh, at around that time I started to uh, become comfortable enough with the tools that I was using to use them to explore a little bit, to kind of see conceptually what I could do in certain areas, and that was really nice. The first couple of years of my time at Rice as an assistant professor, those I think were the I felt the closest to my research because it was mostly just me. I didn't have a student until my second year, and then even then, they worked on a kind of separate project that I had sectioned off for them. But I think during those times, I felt very free to just explore everything on my own and try to find the right fit in terms of what I wanted to focus on. Um, and I think that was when I was most tightly integrated with the research as well. I knew the codes inside and out; they were all mine. I knew all the technical details of everything, and then as I've gotten older and maybe a little more tired, And as I've taken on more students, I think I've tried to maintain a very uh, strong connection to the technical aspects of their work, but I have also tried to I guess give more of that to the students so they can explore the technical aspects themselves. They can learn things so they can get an intuitive sense. I don't want it to just be me telling them this is the technical way in which they do things, because a lot of the times my students will figure out far better ways than I came up with to do things. So at this point now, as I'm kind of reaching the end of my time as an assistant professor, I feel like I am I feel like I understand my field a little bit better. I don't necessarily need to I don't spend quite as much time in the technical parts as I used to. I used to spend, I think, almost every day coding, implementing, getting something to work. And now I might spend like 2 or 3 out of the days really heavily focused on that. But often it'll be with my students or with some collaborators. And so I think I'm a little bit further removed from the nuts and bolts of it. Uh, I think this gives most faculty a chance to, well, try to explore the larger issues, such as, well, what are the kind of what are the problems that are facing your little subfield? What are the problems that are facing your field of your broader field, say just computational physics-based simulations in general? It also gives you a chance to see, well, what are the problems that are facing, say, the department, the more human problems, and it gives you a chance to explore those areas and not just focus completely on your little section of research. That said, I think I would feel really disconnected from this field if I didn't have a chance to just explore, tinker, and code on my own as well. I think that part keeps me feeling grounded and connected to, well, what my students are doing and what everyone else is doing. So yeah, I'm hoping that balance will kind of stay as I continue onward.
That's interesting. Can you share a little bit about like what you enjoy most about your work? I know you've mentioned things here and there.
Sure. By far, it's the sense of discovery. So I can think of almost every single uh student PhD project, master's project, and even some undergraduate projects. Uh, there's just they usually start with, this would be cool if we could do this, or I think we can do this. And there's a kind of very broad, intuitive idea. This is probably possible based on what I've seen in the past, but when you drill down to the nuts and bolts, I feel like then it becomes trickier. Then you see these are the technical issues why this hasn't been done previously, or if we try and account for this, and suddenly we have to give up some other nice properties, mathematical properties of different methods we've analyzed. And overcoming that has always been the most fun part of a project. It feels like I go from a very broad sense of this is what I'd like to do. This is probably possible, narrowing it down to these are the challenges that are in between getting this in between where we are and getting this to work. And that one moment when I think we figure out a key trick or a key way to look at something that makes the project suddenly a lot more tractable, a lot more feasible. That is always the part that I enjoy the most by far. It's a little bit like, so I like doing puzzles with my partner, and often what I find myself doing is taking a little piece and just kind of staring at it and then looking at the reference picture, and then eventually, if I look hard enough, then I can see, okay, it this looks like it probably belongs here, and then immediately it all becomes clear that I can just put this piece right there, and maybe a couple other pieces fall into place. But it feels very much the same way in terms of mathematics, that um, there always is the feeling of a puzzle piece sliding perfectly into place after trying to figure out how it fits in for weeks or months. And that is the most satisfying part by far for every single project I've worked on. And more recently with my students, I think seeing that sense of discovery from their perspective, if they like my some of my students have been discovering things that I didn't realize were possible. They were solving problems that I didn't know how to solve, and seeing the way in which they approach things, it similarly feels like a puzzle piece kind of sliding into place, and suddenly like, oh, I can, like, it feels like I've opened up a view into this world, like when you're playing a video game and suddenly you reveal a giant part of the map because you finally got through one little section. That's a lot of what I love the most about this field of work.
That's great to hear. In your opinion, what do you think are like the most important traits of like being a good teacher and a mentor for college students, or like leading your research group, and like what guidance is most needed for your students and team members?
Hmm. I think so. I'll go with what my undergraduate mentor told me. Uh, he said, I think you, I think he said you have to start with caring, and from there you can kind of you can build onward. I think I would agree with that. There's um, one of the most remarkable things about this department is that uh, everyone has different ways of approaching it, but I think they all fundamentally care a lot about uh, about being a good mentor or teacher or an instructor. Everyone that I've seen come through here is really passionate about the areas that they work in, and that reflects in the courses they teach and in terms of the way in which they approach students. Now, some people will lead them to be more strict with their students because they want to push them and maybe help them exceed their boundaries. For me, I think it shows up in just wanting to be available. Like if someone has a question or if someone is confused, and I really, that's something I'd really like to rectify. Um, I because I believe that everything is should be clear or easy if we kind of look at it in the or it can be clarified or made easier if we look at it from the right perspective. So I try to be really available. I try to answer questions fairly quickly on Slack or other online forums, and I think that's the way in which the way I care about my area comes out. But I think at the core, as long as you care, I think that really that really centers things, because that's the drive, that'll be the driving force behind all the different adjustments you make. If you try to make yourself more effective as a teacher, or if you try to improve your lecture style, then all this I think is best motivated from caring about the area and about the students. Apart from just that core aspect, I think there are sort of technical skills that are also helpful. Just being learning to organize things in a way that's easy for you. That's really helpful. Learning to I guess be a little bit flexible in terms of uh, how you structure the course and how you adapt it as to each class. Every class is a little bit different. I remember one time a grad student came in and just said, "Why aren't you doing it this way? It's a whole lot easier if you view this one thing with this other formulation." I thought that is fantastic, and so immediately the next day I took that and redid the lecture, and it was so much better. Um, yeah, I think these are all helpful. One practical skill that I really appreciate is public speaking, and being comfortable with public speaking, or kind of being on stage does help a little bit. I know there was a faculty member at Rice who's now at Northeastern. I believe he actually took some improv classes to become more comfortable with this. There are definitely instructors of improv and theater that are also focused on well, academics, on how to improve your stage presence, how to better communicate things there, because there is a communicative aspect of teaching as well. I'm not the best at it, but I do think like spending time um, in these bands in Austin, playing music, kind of being on stage for those things, that definitely helped make me feel less uncomfortable in terms of this lecturing as well.
Okay, that's interesting. Do forgive me if I pronounce this wrong, but I noticed that you're interested in researching high order discontinuous Galerkin methods
Mhm.
and high performance computing. So, do you
Yeah,
mind explaining kind of like what that is in layman terms and like how you first became involved in such research?
yeah, most definitely. So broadly, the area that I'm interested in is computational physics-based simulations. So I often use the example, if you ever see like these computer-generated images of a car moving and then it crashes and it gets crumpled and you see all these bright colors show up. Or if you see like a Formula One race car and you see like visualizations of flow going over it, these are the types of simulations that I'm interested in, especially the flow-based simulations, because most of my work nowadays is in fluid dynamics. With all of these methods, I think almost all of them tend to basically do the same thing. They take the area in which, or they take the space in which you're trying to figure out how something works, say how fast this fluid is going, what the pressure of this fluid is at certain points, how it's kind of generating vorticular flow. All of this stuff can be boiled down into values for, say, the velocity or the pressure or say the density or different physical quantities that you can track. So what most simulation methods will do, they'll take a domain and they'll break it up into little small pieces, and then over each individual piece, they'll try to approximate what these values are. So what the velocity is on this little tiny subsection, what the pressure is, et cetera, et cetera. Um, this is true for most methods, and the ways in which different methods are different. Well, what they'll do is they'll approximate these physical quantities over each of these subsections, which I'll call an element, and then they'll evolve those in time, or just try and solve for them if it's a time independent equation. But often the differences between different methods just come down to how you break up these and construct these little elements. So discontinuous Galerkin methods, have they are a type of finite element method which fall under Galerkin methods, and this is a very, very old engineering approach to modeling and simulation, where you just take a domain, you break it up into a whole bunch of tiny triangles, and then over each little triangle or square or cube or tetrahedron in 3D, you try and approximate the solution using some either a linear function, a constant function, or maybe a high order polynomial function. And discontinuous Galerkin methods basically do this third option where over each little individual element, the solution is approximated using a polynomial and it's then evolved. So the reason why I use these methods, why I'm interested in them, is on the technical side, they have some nice mathematical properties which make things easier in certain contexts, especially in fluids, but more so they just make for a very convenient implementation. It was the area that I learned with my postdoc advisor, Tim Warburton. He is a expert on discontinuous Galerkin methods, and I think through working with him, he showed me ways in which you could view a discontinuous Galerkin method uh, as a very simple, minimal set of operations, which I think helps in teaching it. So these discontinuous Galerkin methods, just to finish off the description, the main idea is you have these small elements and the solution can be discontinuous on each one. That's the main thing. So you have on each element a polynomial representation, but they're not necessarily continuous. And so you have to transfer some information between each of these elements, which leads to extra costs, but also makes the implementation, I'd say, significantly easier for certain setups. A lot of the reason I keep using these methods is just because I have some expertise in them, and there's, of course, inertia. But they do make it, they do provide some mathematical properties that have allowed me to develop some of the new schemes that the new numerical simulation techniques that I've been working on for the past, I guess, 5 years now, which are related to the structure of these statistical methods. That said, I do also dabble in other types of discretizations. Other people may work on finite element methods. I've dabbled a little bit in those. I've dabbled a little bit in finite difference type methods as well. And all of these, I think, once you have enough experience in them in computational simulations, all of these look like uh, slight variations on each other. Um, they have different analyses, different mathematics behind them, but in the end, when you implement them, I think you can kind of see very similar features that are shared between all of them.
Wow, that's so interesting. Yeah, I think you explained that really, really well. Um, I'm not sure how often you work with other people in your work, but how difficult or easy would you say it is to like recruit qualified team members, and what qualities do you value most in that?
That is an excellent question, and I will say at this just to start off, I do not know about the second part. Um, that I think has changed a lot over the years. It depends a little bit in terms of what I'm working on. Um, so I, so in terms of recruiting qualified people, I've often had the issue that I think I want to work with more people than I can. Um, that there are phenomenal students uh, at Rice that I've had to turn down working with just because I didn't necessarily have the funding or the space in my group at that time. And uh, I think they would have done excellently in my group, but they're of course doing excellently in other people's groups as well at the moment. Uh, I think in terms of skills, I for me a strong mathematical and computational foundation are really helpful. So it's helpful for me if my students know how to code and they know how to do mathematics, but also to be able to combine the two. Um, Synthesizing two fields or combining two fields together is always a little bit different than being an expert in each field separately. So what I mean by that is it really helps for me when a student knows how to see the mathematics in the computation and see the computation in the mathematics. So to be able to look at some mathematical formulation and think, okay, I can implement this really efficiently computationally, or this is really convenient to put into existing frameworks. That is something I'm really interested in. Similarly, if you can look at your code and if we spend a lot of time debugging code, trying to figure out what went wrong, and often the bugs are not really computational bugs so much as mathematical bugs. Thinking from a mathematical perspective, being able to see an overarching mathematical theme in the code and being able to pick that apart bit by bit, that also ends up being really useful. And I think the most successful students in my group have, well, essentially this skill to be able to uh, um, there is a technical word for this, co-design, I think, to be able to co-design uh, things that involve both mathematics and computation. I'm sure if I was a better engineer or physicist, then being able to interact with that field as well will open up even more avenues. But for myself, these are the two that I focus on.
Interesting. Throughout your career in academia, have you ever faced discrimination as an Asian American, or has your minority experience shaped your work experience at all?
That is a good question. I I am not sure, and this is not be I I'm not sure. I think because I often am not entirely aware until afterwards. So there are a couple mentors that I've talked with at Rice who I think are much more active in the Asian American Pacific Islander communities and are a lot more, I think, cognizant of, uh, say, issues like discrimination or microaggressions or any way in which uh, anti-Asian bias can show up. I am not so aware of this, and I think often so I can think of places where I've encountered this outside of academics. Uh, it's often a little bit more blatant in those situations, but to be honest, I can't think of that many at the moment that have happened while I in the academic settings I'm thinking of. That definitely does not mean that they don't happen. I don't want to dismiss anyone's experience of this. I just think that I have a remarkably low awareness of when this does happen. Some of the I also have a remarkably bad memory of recalling when these events happen. I remember having a conversation with some of the other Asian American faculty at Rice and remarking on something that felt a little strange. And they said that's definitely evidence of bias. But even now, and this was not too long ago, um, I actually don't remember what exactly we talked about. And I'm not sure if this is just weird coping mechanism or mean just losing just not remembering enough as I get older, but um yeah, I I can't think of specific examples right now. I will also say that at least in my particular field, um my field tends so the field that I work in, the subset of these high order Dickinson methods that I focus on, it's a relatively small and I think close community. And at least as far as I can tell, it's a really healthy community, really welcoming, really supportive of, say, young researchers and new people coming in. And I think for that reason as well, I think it can be harder. It's harder to find these. I haven't experienced as many issues, I think, because this was a healthy community. But I do know a lot of several colleagues who work in communities that are, I think, less well adjusted, where they have faced a little bit more, they have faced more challenging circumstances due to their ethnicity and background.
All right, and picking back or piggybacking off of that, so what do you think is your view of like Asian American representation in general in your field?
I think that there's not a lot of Asian Americans in applied math, believe it or not. Um, so we have a member of our department, Richard Tapia, who focuses a lot on issues facing underrepresented minorities in STEM, and I think it was kind of an eye-opening experience to me when one time he just during a talk, I think he pointed at me and said, Asian Americans are underrepresented. And I thought, oh, that's kind of odd, but there's a little bit of truth in that. In that you do see you do see decent representation among East Asian academics at universities and in research positions. But I think, especially among faculty, there aren't as many Asian Americans that I know. I can think of, I think at Rice, I know that there's, I believe, two others that I'm aware of, but they're older than I am. They're full professors. A lot of the Asian colleagues that I have are first generation. I'm not entirely so for me, it's it's a little bit of a strange thing being an Asian American in academics. I think we run to a lot of Asian American students, but we don't necessarily have a lot of them go into academia, and I'm not sure why. So whenever I meet another Asian American in applied mathematics or just at an academic function, it always strikes me that that's a little bit more rare.
Hmm.
So I would like that to change, but I think to do so, I'd first have to understand exactly why that is the case.
Right, that's interesting. I wouldn't have expected that at all either. I noticed that you've written a lot of journals and publications. Which of them do you think you're most proud of and have or have impacted your career the most?
Um, there are a couple that so a lot of them that a lot of the publications that I think have stuck with me the most were the ones that uh, where where they changed the direction I was going, or they marked personal milestones for me. So there's a 2017 paper on Bernstein-Bezier discontinuous Galerkin methods. And I just remember that as being the first paper I got back where the reviews were just like, this is amazing. And I usually the reviewers are like, this is technically what he has done, and here are the mistakes, or the grammar mistakes and the errors and the notational mistakes, and it's fine. Publish it after some revisions. And this one paper actually had one reviewer that just thought this is exactly what we need to see, and it was a really big confidence boost. I'm not sure. I think I'm not sure how true this is for every academic, but at least for me, no one is immune from low confidence in your career at times, I think. So hearing things like this are really helpful. They're a real big morale booster. There was another paper that I published at the very end of my postdoc where I think it was the first time I discovered an idea, did the analysis, and kind of followed through on the idea completely by myself. And the first time someone does that, it's a real, I think that's a real formative experience. So there are times during a graduate project when you'll do a key part yourself, but often your advisor works very closely with you on trying to formulate the project, on trying to guide it through and show you what's going on. But the parts that you are indispensable and fundamentally associated, or that you really took ownership of, I think those are the parts that stick with you. But when you take an idea and just follow through it completely from start to finish, I think that was a moment when I thought, okay, maybe I can do this for a living. Maybe I can do this by myself without on my own, without an advisor or a collaborator or some other supervisor. Um, that one really changed my trajectory as well, and influenced what I did for the next 3 years. And finally, the 2018 paper that my first, so I think it's the paper with the most citations on my Google Scholar at the moment, but there's a 2018 paper on something on entropy stable, conservative and entropy stable, high order discontinuous Galerkin methods, some technical name, but it was the paper that changed my career trajectory completely. It was, so there's a really cool book called, actually, I'm going to grab it. There's a really cool book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. This one by Thomas Kuhn. He's a philosopher of science, and I was reading it around the same time that I did this, and it just talks about the idea of a paradigm shift of what is possible. And I think that paper marked for me a paradigm shift in terms of what I considered possible with these numerical methods. I always assume, so just for context, the challenge was that when we use these high order methods, they end up being much more accurate than existing methods, which are tended to be lower order. So you have this much improved accuracy, but at the cost of kind of sensitivity. Sometimes your simulations would run and then they blow up unexpectedly, and then you're out several hours, or you're trying to figure out if that crash was from a bug or from some mathematical issue. It was hard to make these methods reliable. And I think it was just assumed, since people had been trying to make these methods reliable for 20, 30 odd years, since the mid 80s, it was just assumed at this point that, well, this is an issue you're going to have to deal with until these methods came along. So I wasn't the one who developed these. There was some work by Mark Carpenter and collaborators at NASA. And then there was some work by some other faculty members, Gregor Gassner and a few others in Cologne, Germany, and then some other folks also at Brown, Chiwangshu. A whole bunch of people were involved in setting the framework for this, but they essentially all figured out somewhat independently that there is a nice trick to making these methods not bulletproof, but much more reliable and stable from the get-go. And my paper basically did I think a technical extension of this to a broader class of discontinuous caloric methods. But for me, it was basically a paradigm shift. This changes completely the way in which in which I was approaching these methods. Um, it made it possible to be a lot more precise in terms of figuring out why my code crashes, which is always really helpful. If something doesn't work, it's so hard to figure out why something broke if you don't have a rigorous mathematical theory behind it. And it really changed my opinion in terms of what we could do with these simulation methods going forward. And since 2018, I basically have been focusing completely on this class of methods. They've been the focus of my last two grants. All of my students have been working on this for the past, I think, 3 or 4 students, and it has been a world of a difference in terms of what I was working on. So what I worked on previously was I worked on wave propagation simulations, which still have their own challenges, but a lot of the issues that I was trying to solve were, I think, maybe more niche issues that people who used a specific numerical method for simulating things would face. But most of the broad range of people that were doing wave propagation simulations would never run into these. This recent paper, or for this 2018 paper, I think it allowed me to make an impact in a field where there were many more open problems, like stability and reliability of your simulations is a much more significant issue, I think, in high-speed fluid flows and conservation laws and fluid dynamics. And it felt like a research area that had a lot more to work on for the next couple of years. It didn't hurt. It didn't hurt that. So when I wrote that paper originally, I tried to formulate it in a way that was a little bit different from every other paper that had come before, and it nearly got rejected the first time around because I don't think anyone understood. I don't think I communicated very well what I was doing. So after one very substantial rewrite, I went the reviewers. I've never seen such a big change in the reviewer responses. Both reviewers at first were like, I don't understand any of this, but it looks like you have some interesting results, so maybe clean it up and tell us what's actually going on. And then after the revision, they were both saying this is a significant advance in the field. And I thought it was nice to have kind of everything, all the things I felt with those previous papers, the idea coming together really nicely with formulating the idea, having it come together, being able to take it from start to finish, and the confidence boost of having a good review. All of those were really present in this last paper, in this 2018 paper on entropy stable discontinuous caloric methods. So those were probably the 3 most impactful in my mind for me
Wow.
personally.
Yeah, that's great to hear. On a different wavelength, with the rise of ChatGPT and other tools, what kind of a role do you think could be contributed by AI in your field?
Man, that is it's a really good question. So I think AI in our field it shows so much promise. Um, so I think AI I think it's probably here to stay. I don't work as much on that in my own group, but I do work with some other folks who work on machine learning based approaches to simulations. They call these data-driven methods for physics-based simulations, and they are often so much easier to use and so much easier to implement and require much less technical background. The thing I really like about AI is that I think it lowers the learning curve and the bar for accessibility to a much broader audience in terms of these computational simulations. This is an issue in my field that I think has, well, kind of been an issue for as long as we've existed. Just that the most advanced state-of-the-art methods require a significant amount of background to really sink your teeth into them. So I think AI is fundamentally changing things. I think the community as a whole is also finding that with how easy AI is to use, they also have to balance this with it's still a little bit mysterious. So AI is a little bit of magic. They have the structure of neural networks that underlie AI provide a much better approximation than all the traditional approaches that we've tried. But because it's a little bit like magic, when it breaks, I think it's also hard to tell exactly why it breaks. So at least from what I can tell of the AI community, there's a lot of observation going on right now where people are seeing just interesting patterns. Um, I think the first wave of AI papers was basically showing like what is possible. The next wave I thought was maybe showing, well, it's not always realistic to expect the best case scenario. And the most recent set of AI papers that I've been going over has, I think, been trying to tease out exactly why it is, or at least observe patterns. So when AI fails and when it doesn't. And if we figure that out, and if there's a solid computational, solid theoretical foundation as explaining why this is the case, then I think it would, oh, man, I don't know. It would be utterly transformative for the field. I think so. I'm working with a group that is doing AI-based simulations of some complex reactive fluid, high complex fluid flows, let's say, and they still do need numerical simulations like my field to exist to provide data to in which they can train and in which this neural network can learn. But I think if if you have a reliable AI approach to physics-based simulation, I think that really opens up the possibility of many more people using this. And this, you already see this at some industry, some companies like Exxon, for example, they're shifting much more to an AI-driven approach. I think this is true for a lot of the energy companies in Houston. And I know, I mean, tech companies everywhere are basically investing in this. So I'm sorry, I know that's a long way off from ChatGPT. That's more general machine learning and AI in my field. In terms of ChatGPT itself, that I think it remains to be seen. I think I've seen it transform the way in which we already write papers. So we can generate a pretty decent paper just by inputting in a couple of bullet points and asking ChatGPT to fill in the rest. It helps in writing. I mean, it can spit out a conclusion or an introduction fairly easily. It can even generate code, but I think the more technical things get, the harder it is for at least the current version of ChatGPT to really pick up on things. So my students have experimented with it to just see, well, can you write a code that will do a numerical simulation of this or this or this? And often it'll spit out a code that does something, but not exactly what they asked for. It's really, I don't know. It's hard to say because it changes so quickly. My hope is that it becomes a tool. I'm teaching a programming class in the fall, and my hope is that I'll be able to discuss ChatGPT and encourage students to try to use it, but also try to illustrate some of the pitfalls. If you generate, for example, if you generate code with ChatGPT, maybe it works like 90% of the time, and then 10% of the time it generates like some small thing that's not entirely to spec. That's a very long way of saying I'm not entirely sure. I'm excited to see.
No, yeah, that's really interesting. What advice would you give to Asian Americans of the younger generation that think they're interested in pursuing a career in either like STEM-based research or in teaching?
Um, I think my biggest suggestion would be figure out what works for you. So as Asian Americans, I think a lot of our families tend to they want us to live up to our potential. They want us to be able to do the best that we can do. Not everyone's going to, of course, be an amazing pro athlete or a successful doctor or lawyer, but I think most most families want their kids to do the best that they can. And I think I would say that really has helped in my career as well. So I learn far better from sort of simple illustrative examples where you cut out most of the mathematics, to be honest, and you just try and get the main idea behind something. I work really well with codes that are often slower but easier to pick apart that I can kind of go in and experiment and tinker with. And I think at a younger age, I would have thought, well, these are weaknesses. These are things I can't do without. And now that I'm a little more mature, I think it strikes me as no, this is just the way in which I think. And I think it really is important to uh I didn't spend a lot of time learning about myself until maybe the end of grad school and sometimes in my postdoc. But learning about yourself, knowing yourself well also means that you kind of know how you work best. It means you can be kind to yourself when you are facing issues and struggling because maybe you're not an auditory or visual learner, maybe you're a tactile or experiential learner, and that's okay. You can of course try to, I think as an undergrad, while you're young, I think you can of course try to change yourself to see if you can expand the ways in which you can learn, in which expand your skill set. But I think it's also important to balance that with knowing there are just some things that you more naturally gravitate towards. And if you can accept that part of accept basically who you are. So first it requires figuring out, I think, who exactly you are, what you tend towards. And if you can accept all that, then I think it really is a very freeing way to it really makes you feel much more free as you go into your career. So I wouldn't have spent as much time trying to become an amazing functional analyst in terms of my mathematical background. Uh, I know I'm not that great of, so my advisor had a great story. When I was applying for a postdoc, he wrote me a recommendation letter and said in the letter, he told me what he wrote. He said he's not the best mathematician and he's not the best programmer, and but then he qualified that with he sees connections between things. And it's really like I think back to that a lot because it really does seem to be the thing that has helped me the most in my career, recognizing that, yeah, I'm not that great at the technical aspect of either the computation or the mathematics, but I am halfway decent at making broad intuitive connections and conspiracy theories between numerical methods. And that has served me remarkably well in my career. That's my main advice to future generations.
Thank you for that. I noticed that you're involved in both the Society for Industrial and Applied Math and the U.S. Association for Computational Mechanics. So, could you share a little bit more about your role in both these organizations and how you first got involved?
Yeah, definitely. So both of these are organizations that I was basically introduced to during either grad school or my postdoc. So my graduate advisor was more in the computational mechanics engineering community, and that's much more USACM. So I will often go to their conferences. They have a US National Congress on Computational Mechanics. And then I'll often also go to the SIAM conferences like SIAM Computational Science and Engineering, which was introduced to me by my postdoc advisor. So I mostly just attend conferences for USACM. I haven't been quite as involved in the organization, but for SIAM, because a lot of the department is also involved heavily, I recently took a officer position in our local SIAM Texas Louisiana chapter where I'm just secretary. So this just involves going to the meetings, helping with the planning of our annual conference, trying to take down minutes and sending out emails. But it's nice to be able to give back and see all the work that's involved with this annual meeting. And it, yeah, Siam has really done. It's really been a place that I felt like has been my academic conference home. It's always the conference that I'm looking forward to the most every 2 years when it shows up. Uh, and so being able to give back a little bit to it has has felt great.
That's great to hear. Um, what do you think about the state of math education in the US? Because I do hear that, compared to other countries, especially in Asia, we often lag behind.
So I'm not entirely convinced of this. I think I think so I'm not a math educator, first of all. I should probably specify that most of what I know is hearsay and my own guesses as to what's going on. But my experience with uh my experience has been that we might lag behind in terms of some metrics. Like definitely there are students in East Asian countries or even European countries that just score much better than we do. Um, and there are, of course, issues of inequality and access in our education system that are definitely seen very strongly in mathematics. But I think the I think our math education system, when it works, I think it's a long-term payoff. So I don't, for example, I don't know Common Core that well, and I don't know well enough to really debate about the intricacies. But from what I understand, it's aimed at trying to introduce uh, the why into mathematics. When I learned algebra, I learned essentially a set of rules, and I think for the most part, if those seem to work for me, but there were concepts in high school and middle school that I thought it would have been nice if we had gone a little bit more into the process of mathematical thinking. My experience in higher education has been that um, people who are really good at mathematics in high school are not necessarily that enamored with mathematics in college. I think because it's a very different beast. Mathematics in college is, I mean, sometimes you don't even see numbers in a class, but it becomes so much more of a conceptual beast and an intuitive way of thinking that it almost strikes me as being closer to philosophy or art at times. And I think Common Core, from what I can tell, is trying to introduce some of that same intuitive conceptual thinking into lower level mathematics. I'm not sure if this is the best way to do it. From what I can tell with myself, I often do better learning the rules and then building an intuition around them. But I appreciate that this is, I think, some of the strength of American education when it works. I think I should probably stop here and say that I just don't know the area well enough to really make more comments. Uh, but from my experience, at least at the higher education level, um, we have good students from all sorts of backgrounds, from from people who went, students who went to college in East Asian countries and have a very different background. They often have different strengths, and students who went to school in the U.S., they have a whole different set of strengths. Um, I think one of the things you learn very quickly with mathematics is that there's not exactly a right way. There's not a unique right way to do something. There are many right ways. And I would say for math education, would I would conjecture the same is probably true, that there's a lot of different ways to become good at math. Uh, just depends on what you exactly mean by good at math.
That's an interesting way to look at it. So do you think like people can be like born naturally good at math or coding or other STEM related subjects?
I'm going to say yes, just because I think I've met some people who, if they weren't born good at math, then they got on board really, really quick. But do you ever watch Ratatouille?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite movies.
Same, but I think the end the main theme, like anyone can cook, and what that means, like a not necessarily anyone can cook, but a great cook can come from anywhere kind of applies to mathematics too. So you have people who are super talented from a young age, but you also have really late bloomers. Um, a mathematician who proved the twin primes conjecture, I think he was well into his 40s, if I'm not mistaken, and essentially working as an instructor at a smaller school and accounting for Subway on the side, if I remember correctly. There's a Korean mathematician whose name is I'm missing right now, but if I'm not mistaken, he won the Fields Medal, I think the Nobel Prize of Mathematics, but essentially took some time off during college and was a real late bloomer. I think, yeah, I think there are people for whom certain types of mathematics just come very naturally to them. But I'm a firm believer that anyone can be good at math. Sorry, I should say I'm a firm believer that if anyone wants to become good at mathematics, and they can, it's just a matter of what you consider mathematics. Mathematics can be highly technical. It can be numbers and formulas and kind of a more rigid structured thing. It can also be really loose and flowing, and even the mathematics in different countries kind of reflected this. So there are some histories of mathematics and logic and philosophy that talk about like brawls or conflicts that would arise between like the French school of mathematics and the German school of mathematics, where one is like, no, you have to have everything postulated and rigorous, and the other one's like, no, it should be it should be like free flowing and artistic and beautiful. And I think both are possible. Both are true. Both are mathematics. So I'm going to weasel out of that question by saying I think it depends on how you define mathematics. I think anyone uh, can be good at it if they are willing to change how they think of mathematics.
Wow, that's such an interesting way to think about it. I think I'm going to shift to a couple questions here that are more about like building a portrait of you and who you are as a person. Um,
Sure.
so, how would you identify yourself in terms of ethnicity and nationality?
Yeah, I would say I'm Chinese American, Asian American. My mom is from Taiwan, my dad is from Hong Kong. But I think I generally I generally resonate with the Chinese American experience.
How would you describe the Asian American community in Houston?
Oh wow. Uh it is it is more closely connected than you might expect. So I think I grew up within a very specific subset of the Asian American community, the Christian Asian American community. And I always got the sense that if there was another Asian American kid who went to a church, that we were separated by at most like one connection. Like there would always be like a friend of a friend, or like, oh, you went to that camp or that event, or oh yeah, I know this I know your church. It always felt like it was not that hard to make one person to basically talk to a friend who knew someone else. It felt like a very closely connected network.
Wow, that's so interesting. Um, can you share about your current family life with us?
Yeah, sure. So my brother and I still live in Houston. He moved back recently. My parents still well, they spend some time in Houston, some time in California, and it's always really nice to see them when they're here. And I try to visit them in California whenever I can as well. We still try to do family calls. It's a tradition we started during the pandemic when we just couldn't see each other, that we would just do these Zoom calls every Sunday evening. And that's been a really nice it's been a really nice tradition that we've kept up. Um it's I still lean on my parents for I think everything life related. My mom is an amazing realtor. My dad knows, I think, all the technical stuff I could ever ask for about home renovation or accounting or taxes, just the stuff that just the administrative stuff that you have to do in life. And so I am so grateful for all their help in all of this. We um yeah, I think we try our best to stay connected to each other and yeah, I love my family.
That's great to hear. Can you tell us about some of your hobbies or interests outside of your career?
Sure. They change every couple of years. So I still very much love music. I go to a wonderful church called Holy Family HTX. That's an Episcopal church downtown, and I'm lucky enough to play with them whenever I can. So it gives me a chance to stay connected to that musical side. And they have such a wonderful set of musicians at that church. I used to build bikes and I don't as much anymore, but I still have several of the bikes that I've built, and it's been so much fun to ride them whenever it's possible to ride them in Houston. So it's a little hot right now, uh but I've enjoyed getting to know like the bayou systems in Houston. It always feels like I mean, despite the fact that I think I've lived here for, oh gosh, way too long, it still feels like I'm discovering things about Houston. We just discovered the Bayou trails maybe during the pandemic. I didn't even know they existed before that, and they are fantastic. I my brother and I, of course, still we're both fans of the same animes and same video games, and it's been good to just uh it's always good to just talk with him and catch up and see like, oh, did you see that last episode of this or that last did you play the most recent version of whatever. So that's always a great way for me to decompress. I've enjoyed animation and video games, I think, like most other Asian American boys, probably since I was very small. And more recently, I've actually gotten really into electric scooters. I actually commuted to the office on an electric scooter, and I try to do so whenever it's not raining or whenever I don't need to carry something. Just saves on gas, a lot more flexible, better for the environment, and feels kind of nice it feels like a much safer version of a motorcycle to me.
That is
So
really cool. Yeah.
yeah, these are a couple of the hobbies.
That's cool. How would you describe like the Asian American community in Houston?
Uh, I think we talked about that one already.
Right, right. Sorry, do you want to expand a little bit on like maybe like in how about like broader like in Texas in general, or how about like the whole of the US?
Yeah, sure. So I'm not really sure how broadly this conclusion holds, but I get the sense that the Asian American community in Texas is, at least through the Chinese churches, fairly well connected. So a lot of my friends from Dallas or Austin, they would still be about one connection away through some random person in the Chinese church. And yeah, I think it'll turn out often that if I meet someone who went to a Chinese church in one of those other cities, I'll realize that they know a whole bunch of my friends as well. Um, I think in terms of the uh, broader Asian American community in America, I think it's, from what I can tell, it's kind of coming into it's I think it's becoming more prevalent. I think they're starting to there is a there always has been a strong activist and sort of self-aware movement among AAPI folks in Asian America. But I think I feel like it feels like I've seen more discourse about it nowadays. I feel like along with that discourse has come the space to maybe talk about individual or differences between different Asian subgroups. So my partner and I, we really enjoy watching cooking shows. Padma Lakshmi's Taste the Nation is fantastic. Um, and what we've noticed is just an increased emphasis in cooking shows like this and others on not just Chinese food. It's not just Yan can cook anymore, but it's starting to become like individual parts of China, Fujian food, Chongqing food. It's and you kind of see like I'm starting to see more history of Chinese people in America, like the different waves of immigration and kind of how they've shown up in different places, as well as increased emphasis on non-Chinese, non-East Asian um, non-East Asian, Asian American populations, uh, Filipino, Vietnamese, Korean, like all these little subcultures that have been kind of lumped together for a while. I'm starting to see increased emphasis on each of their unique individual characteristics and how they thrive in different parts of the country. So that's been really encouraging, and seeing this representation, I mean, on TV, even in like some of the animated shows or random cartoons that we'll watch, it's it feels like things are like representation is getting better and better. Um, I think one thing that I hadn't really appreciated as much is the role of the way in which different Asian communities around the country might feel different. So I have several cousins in Canada, for example, and there's very strong immigrant Asian American community up there that feels very different than the Asian American community that I know in Houston, which again in turn feels very, very different from the Asian American community that I've seen in LA. Um, I feel like I'm always in awe and kind of the political awareness and the activism and the sort of intelligence of discourse that I see coming out of the Western U.S. area. Um, I feel like I'm not sure if this is entirely true, but I feel like in Houston, at least, I see a lot more children of first generation immigrants. And so to me, it seems like there's a kind of uniquely large crowd of, I guess we're second generation Asian Americans in Houston and in Texas. Uh, I don't know Canada well enough. I'm sure they have their own experience as well, but it feels, I guess, to connect it to what I said before, um, it feels like being seen more and more. Like it's not like I feel like it used to be seen just meant someone recognizes, okay, Asian Americans are or AAPI folks are important in this aspect, and more it feels it it feels like being seen beyond just the AAPI label, and that has been really cool.
Right. That's such a great way to put it. I know a few times you've mentioned like Christianity. Was this something that you kind of grew up with, or something that you kind of discovered for yourself?
Yeah, I grew up with it. I think I'm not entirely sure how true this is, but I think my mom sent us to church because that is where the good kids hung out. Uh, but I was really involved a lot as a kid and all through college. Um, I think I grew up evangelical. I don't think I identify as that anymore. And I think throughout graduate school, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, well, uh, I have some questions about the faith. Uh, what happens now if I no longer believe in certain aspects of the Christianity I grew up in? What do I replace that with? What uh, what how does that change the way in which I interact with my faith? And I think the churches that I've been at since uh, have reflected that. So I went to a church in Austin called Vox Beignet, which I think focused a lot on, well, the role of art in Christian life, and was a lot more progressive. It showed me a different Christianity than I think the one that I grew up with. The church we have here in Houston, Holy Family HTX, I think is very similarly so. It reminds me a lot of it. And um, in a lot of ways, I think I used to be a lot more certain about my faith uh, as when I was growing up. I think after college, after and going to grad school, I had some questions that made me much less certain, and I don't think that uncertainty has really ever gone away. But I think it's been a little bit replaced by the faith traditions I try to be a part of, by them trying to see beauty in the faith. So I think a lot of what I grew up with was a faith that said that a faith that a faith that I interpreted as being valuable because it was correct. There was a lot of I was really interested in apologetics and just proving that I was right. And after I didn't really know if I was right or not, then I think it uh, these other churches showed me how you can try to seek, well, beauty in terms of art, in terms of the causes that you champion, in terms of the ways in which you try to reach out to other people and to make a positive impact in their lives. Um, I think so. I think my relationship with faith and Christianity has changed a lot over the past 10 years. But it's felt more stable. Like this is kind of uh I think it's I feel like I'll probably I feel like I know a little bit more with the type of faith that I have now after spending time at Vox Vignette and at Holy Family.
That's great to hear. Speaking of Holy Family, how did you first like get initially involved in them, and um, like why did you decide to choose this particular like community or congregation?
Yeah, very simply put, Zachary McKenzie, from who moved to Houston from Austin before us, went to Holy Family, and I thought, okay, well, we'll try it out. Yeah, I tried a couple different churches beforehand, and not none of them seemed to be a perfect fit. And the Holy Family just felt, I think, immediately right. Um, I mean, so apart from the art and everything, I think they also they they had a lot of people, I think, who had been burned by the church before. And I think that creates a kind of unique community that's centered a little bit around grief and sadness. And I think there's a seriousness to that is a little hard to replicate in some other churches. So thank you, Zach, for telling us about this place. And pretty much from the very first time I visited, I thought this seems like a good place. I went and talked to the music leader afterwards, Luke, and said, I love what you're doing. Y'all sound great." He asked, "Do I play?" And I said, "Yeah." He's like, "Do you want to play?" And starting from the second week I visited, I started playing with them. So they're a real welcoming place.
That's great to hear. Like what is the extent of how you're involved in it? Is it like I know you mentioned you play with a music group, do you like attend services or any sort of like Bible studies or things like that?
Yeah. So I play with the music group when I can, when I'm free. I I attend one of their dinner groups, which are these just kind of informal get-togethers with other couples or members of the church. And I tried. There are several events that I really like attending. Like they hold certain film screenings at times that I've really enjoyed. Let's see, they had a pickleball event that I wish I had gone to. Um, I think yeah, I'm not involved in like the leadership or the sort of direction. I think I probably don't have enough time to really sink my teeth into that, but it's definitely and it's definitely a creative outlet for me. And yeah.
That's great to hear. Have you ever experienced like a miracle or an answer to a prayer, or what are some other defining moments that you think you've had in your journey of faith?
So short answer, I don't think so. I feel like I was even as a much more um even as a much more evangelical kid, I don't think I ever really felt like a direct answer. Uh, it was always a little confusing to me when someone would say God spoke to me because I was like, I don't know what that means. I don't think I've ever experienced this. Um, so not in that sense. I think I think more recently I've tried to understand miracles and prayers as uh in a different way. Miracles as being, I mean, something that might seem ordinary. So, I mean, some folks have uh there are some authors who I've heard who talk about miracles as just being, well, an extra few months with with a sick family member. Nothing real special and nothing that like life is life changing, but gives you time to spend with them. I think uh I think there are probably miracles I don't even notice. Um yeah, I unfortunately no, I don't think I really have experienced that as much myself.
All right. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us before we wrap this up?
Um No, I think, well, thank you very much for doing this. I've watched a couple of these and these are and I'm really glad the Chow Center uh is 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 spearheading this. So, and
Right.
thank
Yeah.
you for your time.
Again, thank you so much for interviewing with us. It was such a great experience. It was so wonderful to hear about your life and some of the things you've done. Have a wonderful day. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any other questions. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Karina, and thank you. Yeah, it's my pleasure. Take care.
You too.